Chapter 5. That evening, Aaron Sergeyevich had a visitor. He was an old gentleman with a sandy mustache clipped in the English fashion, very dependable looking, very dapper in his frock coat and striped trousers. Vladimir was regaling him with Maggie's bouillon when Genin entered. The air was tinged blue with cigarette smoke. "Mr. Genin, Mr. Kunitsin," Anton Sergeyevich, breathing heavily, his pince-nez twinkling, gently pushed Genin into an armchair. "This, Lev Glebovich, is my old schoolfellow who once wrote cribs for me." Kunitsin grinned. "That's so," he said in a deep, rounded voice. "But tell me, my dear Anton Sergeyevich, what time is it? Still early? Time to sit a while yet?" Kunitsin stood up, pulling down his waistcoat. "I can't. My wife's expecting me." "In that case I have no right to detain you." Anton Sergeyevich spread his hands and glanced sidelong through his pince-nez at his visitor. "Please give my regards to your wife. I haven't the pleasure of knowing her, but give her my regards all the same." "Thank you," said Kunitsin. "Delighted. Goodbye. I believe I left my coat in the hall." "I'll see you out," said Potyagin. "Please excuse me, Lev Glebovich. I'll be back in a moment." Alone, Genin settled more comfortably into the old green armchair and smiled reflectively. He had called on the old poet because he was probably the only person who might understand his disturbed state. He wanted to tell him about many things, about sunsets over a high road in Russia, about birch groves. He was, after all, that same Potyagin whose verses were to be found beneath little vignettes in old bound volumes of magazines like the World Illustrated and the Pictorial Review. Anton Sergeyevich returned, gloomily shaking his head. "He insulted me," he said, sitting down at the table and drumming on it with his fingers. "Oh, how he insulted me! What's the matter?" asked Genin. Anton Sergeyevich took off his pince-nez and polished it with the edge of the tablecloth. "He despises me, that's what's the matter. Do you know what he said to me just now? He gave me one of his cold, sarcastic little smiles, and he said, 'You've been spending your time scribbling poetry, and I haven't read a word of it. If I had read it, I would have wasted the time when I could have been working.' That's what he said to me, Lev Glebovich. I ask you, is that an intelligent thing to say?" "What is he?" asked Genin. "Deuce knows. He makes money. Ah, well, you see, he's a person who—" "But what's there to feel insulted about? He has one talent, you have another. Anyway, I'll bet you despise him too." "But Lev Glebovich," Potyagin fretted, Am I not right to despise him? It's not that which is so awful. The awful thing is that a man like him dares to offer me money." He opened his clenched fist and threw a crumpled banknote onto the table. "And the awful thing is that I took it. Look and admire. 20 marks. G.D. it." The old man seemed to quiver all over. His mouth was opening and shutting, the little gray beard under his lower lip twitching, his fat fingers drumming on the table. Then he sighed with a painful wheezing sound and shook his head. "Peter Kunitsin. Yes, I still remember. He was good in school, that rascal. Always so punctual with a watch in his pocket. During classes he used to hold up his fingers to show how many more minutes until the bell rang. Graduated from high school with a gold medal. It must be strange for you remembering that," said Genin pensively. "Come to think of it, it's even odd to remember some everyday thing, though not really everyday at all. Something that happened a few hours ago." Potyagin gave him a keen but kindly look. "What's happened to you, Lev Glebovich? Your face looks somehow brighter. Have you fallen in love again?" "Yes, there is a strangeness about the way we remember things. How nicely you beam, dash it! I had a good reason for coming to see you, Anton Sergeyevich, and all I could offer you is Kunitsin. Let him be a warning to you. How did you get on at school?" "So-so," said Genin, smiling again. "The Balashov Academy in Petersburg. Know it?" he went on, slipping into Potyagin's tone of voice, as one often does when talking to an old man. "I remember the schoolyard. We used to play football there. There was firewood piled up under an archway, and now and again the ball used to knock down a log. We preferred bat and tag, and Cossacks and robbers," said Potyagin. "And now life has gone," he added unexpectedly. "Do you know, Anton Sergeyevich, today I remember those old magazines which used to print your poetry, and the birch groves." "Did you really?" The old man turned to him with a look of good-natured irony. "What a fool I was! For the sake of those birch trees I wasted all my life. I overlooked the whole of Russia. Now, thank God, I've stopped writing poetry. Done with it. I even feel ashamed at describing myself as a poet when I have to fill in forms. By the way, I made a complete mess of things again today. The official was even offended. I shall have to go again tomorrow." Genin looked at his feet and said, When I was in the upper forms, my schoolmates thought I had a mistress, and what a mistress, a society lady. They respected me for it. I didn't object because it was I who started the rumor. I see, Potyagin nodded. There's something artful about you, Lushovka. I like it. Lyovushka. I like it. In actual fact, I was absurdly chaste, and felt none the worse for it either. I was proud of it like a special secret, yet everybody thought I was very experienced. Mind you, I certainly wasn't prudish or shy. I was simply living as I was and waiting, and my schoolmates, the ones who used foul language and panted at the very word woman, were also spotty and dirty with sweaty palms. I despised them for their spots, and they lied revoltingly about their amorous adventures. I must confess, said Potyagin in his lackluster voice, that I began with a chambermaid. She was so sweet and gentle with gray eyes. Her name was Glasha. That's the way it goes. No, I waited, said Gannon softly, from the onset of puberty to 16, say 3 years. When I was 13, we were playing hide-and-seek once, and I and another boy of the same age found ourselves hiding together in a wardrobe. In the darkness he told me that there were marvelous beauties who allowed themselves to be undressed for money. I didn't properly hear what he called them, and I thought it was Prinstitute, a mixture of princess and young ladies' institute. So I had an entrancing, mysterious mental image of them, but then of course I soon realized how mistaken I had been, because I saw nothing attractive about the women who scrolled up and down the Nevsky, rolling their hips and calling us high school boys pencils. And so after 3 years of proud chastity, my wait came to an end. It was in summer, at our place in the country. Yes, yes, said Potyagin, I can see it all. Rather hackneyed, though. Sweet 16, love in the woods. Again I looked at him with curiosity. But what could be nicer, Anton Sergeyevich? Oh, I don't know. Don't ask me, my dear chap. I put everything into my poetry that I should have put into my life, and now it's too late for me to start all over again. The only thought that occurs to me at the moment is that in the final reckoning it's better to have been sanguine by temperament, a man of action, if you must get drunk and do it properly and smash the place up. There was that, too, Gannon smiled. Potyagin thought for a moment. You are talking about the Russian countryside, Lev Glebovich. You, I expect, will probably see it again, but I shall leave my old bones here. Or if not here, then in Paris. I seem to be thoroughly out of sorts today. Forgive me. Both were silent. A train passed. Far, far away, a locomotive gave a wild, inconsolable scream. The night was cold blue outside the uncurtained window panes, which reflected the lampshade in a brightly lit corner of the table. Potyagin sat hunched, his gray head bowed, twirling a leather cigarette case in his hands. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking about, whether it was about the dullness of his past life, or whether old age, illness, and poverty had risen before his mind's eye with the same dark clarity as the reflection in the nighttime window, whether it was about his passport, about Paris, or whether he was thinking glumly that the pattern on the carpet exactly fitted the round toe of his boot, or how much he would like a glass of cold beer, or that his visitor had outsat his welcome, God knows. But as Gannon looked at his drooping head, at the senile tufts of hair in his ears and the shoulders round him from riding, he felt such a sudden access of sadness that he lost all desire to talk about summer in Russia, about the pathways in the park, and at least of all about the astonishing thing that happened the day before. Well, I must go now. Sleep well, Anton Sergeyevich. Good night, Lyovushka. Potyagin sighed. I enjoyed our talk. You, at least, do not despise me for taking Kunitsin's money. Only at the last moment in the doorway did Gannon stop and say, Do you know what, Anton Sergeyevich? I've started a wonderful affair. I'm going to her now. I'm very happy. Potyagin gave an encouraging nod. I see. Give her my regards. I haven't the pleasure, but give her my regards all the same. 6. Strange to say, he could not remember exactly when he had first seen her. Perhaps at a charity concert staged in a barn on the border of his parents' estate. Perhaps, though, he had caught a glimpse of her even before that. Her laugh, her soft features, her dark complexion, and the big bow in her hair were all somehow familiar to him when a student medical orderly at the local military hospital, World War was in full swing, had told him about this 15-year-old sweet and remarkable girl, as the student had put it. But that conversation had taken place before the concert. Now Gannon racked his memory in vain. He just could not picture their very first meeting. The fact was that he had been waiting for her with such longing, had thought so much about her during those blissful days after the typhus, that he had fashioned her a unique image long before he actually saw her. Now, many years later, he felt that their imaginary meeting and the meeting which took place in reality had blended and merged imperceptibly into one another, since as the living person she was only an uninterrupted continuation of the image which had foreshadowed her. That evening in July, Gedden had pushed open the creaking iron front door and walked out into the blue of the twilight. The bicycle ran with special ease at dusk, the tire emitting a kind of whisper as it palpated each rise and dip in the hard earth along the edge of the road. As he glided past the darkened stables, they gave off a breath of warmth, a sound of snorting, and the slight thud of a shifting hoof. Further on, the road was enveloped on both sides by birch trees, noiseless at that hour. Then, like a fire smoldering on the threshing door, a faint light shone in the middle of a field, and a dark stream of people straggled with a festive hum toward the lone-standing barn. Inside, a stage had been knocked up, rows of seats installed, light flooded over the heads and shoulders, playing in people's eyes, and there was a smell of caramels and kerosene. A lot of people had turned up. The back was filled with pleasant men and women. The dacha folk were in the middle, while in the front, on white benches borrowed from the manorial park, sat about 20 patients from the military hospital in the village, quiet and morose, with hairless patches blotching the gray-blue of their very round, shorn heads. Here and there on the walls, decorated with fir branches, were cracks through which peeped the starry night, as well as the black shadows of country boys who had clambered up outside on tall piles of logs. The opera bass from Petersburg, a gaunt man with a face like a horse, gave forth a cavernal boom. The village school choir, obedient to the melodious flick of a tuning fork, joined in with the refrain. Amid the hot yellow glare, amid the sounds that took on visible form in the folds of crimson and silvery headscarves, fluttering eyelashes, black shadows on the roof beams, shifting wherever there was a puff of the night breeze, amid all this glitter and popular music, among all the heads and shoulders in the large crowded barn, Gedden saw only one thing. He stared ahead at a brown tress tied with a black bow, slightly frayed at the edges, and his eyes caressed the dark, smooth, girlish sheen of the hair at the temple. Whenever she turned her face sideways to give the girl sitting beside her one of her rapid, smiling glances, he could also see the strong color in her cheek, the corner of a flashing Tartar eye, and the delicate curve of her nostril alternately stretching and tightening as she laughed. Later, when the concert was over, the Petersburg bass was driven away in the local mill's owner's huge car with a mysterious light over the grass, and then, with a sweep of its beam, dazzled a sleeping birch tree in the footbridge over a brook, and when the crowd of fair vacationists and a festive flutter of white frocks drifted away through the blue darkness across the dew-laden clover, and someone lit a cigarette in the dark, holding the flaring match to his face in cupped hands, Gedden, in a state of lonely excitement, walked home, the spokes of his bicycle clicking faintly as he pushed it by the saddle. In one wing of the manor house, between the larder and the housekeeper's room, there was a spacious, old-fashioned water closet. Its window gave on to a neglected part of the garden, where, in the shade of an iron roof, a pair of black wheels surmounted a well, and a wooden water ran through over the ground between the bare winding roots of 3 huge bushy poplars. The window was decorated by a stained glass knight, with a square beard and mighty calves, and he glowed strangely in the dim light of a paraffin lamp with a tin reflector which hung beside the heavy velvet cord. You pulled the cord, and from the mysterious depths of the oaken throne there would come a watery rumbling and hollow gurgles. Gedden flung open the casement and installed himself, feet and all, on the window's ledge. The velvet cord swung gently, and the starry sky between the black poplars made you want to heave a deep sigh, and that moment when he sat on the window ledge of that lugubrious lavatory, and thought how he would probably never get to know the girl with the black bow on the nape of her delicate neck, and waited in vain for a nightingale to start trilling in the poplars as in a poem by Fett. That moment Gedden now rightly regarded as the highest and most important point in his whole life. He could not remember when it was he saw her next, whether it was the following day or a week later. A sunset before evening tea, he had swung himself onto the wedge of sprung leather. He bent forward over the handlebars and ridden straight off into the western glow. He always chose the same circular route, through 2 hamlets divided by a pine wood, and then along the highway between fields and back home through the big village of Roskilde, which lay on the river Oradej, sung by Raleigh a century before. He knew the road by heart, now narrow and flat with its compact margin running alongside a dangerous ditch now paved with cobblestones which made his front wheel bounce, elsewhere scored with treacherous ruts and smooth, pink, and firm. He knew that road by feel and by sight, as one knows a living body, and he rode expertly along it, pressing resilient pedals into a rustling void. The evening sun banded through trunks of a pine coppice with red fire. From dacha gardens came the knocking of cricket balls. Midges kept getting into one's mouth and eyes. Occasionally on the highway he would stop by a little pyramid of road-building stone, above which a telegraph pole, its wood peeling in grayish strips, gave off a gentle, desolate hum. He would lean on his bicycle, looking across the fields at one of those forest ranges only found in Russia, remote, serrated, black, while above it the golden west was broken only by a single long lilac cloud, from under which the rays spread out like a burning fan. And as he stared at the sky and listened to the cow mooing almost dreamily in a distant village, he tried to understand what it all meant, that sky and the fields and the humming telegraph pole. He felt that he was just on the point of understanding it when suddenly his head would start to spin and the lucid languor of the moment became intolerable. He had no idea where he might meet her or overtake her, at what turn of the road, in this copse or the next. She lived in Voskresink and would go out for a walk in the deserted sunny evening at exactly the same time as he. Gannon noticed her from a distance and at once felt a chill round his heart. She walked briskly, blue-skirted, her hands in the pockets of her blue serge jacket, under which was a white blouse. As Gannon caught up with her like a soft breeze, he saw only the folds of blue stuff stretching and rippling across her back, and the black silk bow like two outstretched wings. As he glided past, he never looked into her face but pretended to be absorbed in cycling, although a minute earlier, imagining their meeting, he had sworn that he would smile at her and greet her. In those days he thought she must have some unusual, resounding name, and when he found out from the same student that she was called Mary, he was not at all surprised, as though he had known it in advance. And that simple little name took on for him a new sound, an entrancing significance. "Mary," Gannon whispered. "Mary." He took a deep breath and held it, listening to the beating of his heart. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. The trains did not run, and as a result the house seemed to have come to a standstill. On the chair, its arms flung out like a man struck rigid in the middle of a prayer. There hung in the darkness the vague white shape of his cast-off shirt. "Mary," Gannon repeated, again trying to put into those two syllables all the music they had once held, the wind, the humming of telegraph poles, the happiness, together with another secret sound which gave that word its very life. He lay on his back and listened to his past, and presently from the next room came a low, gentle, intrusive "tu-tu, tu-tu." Alfirov was looking forward to Saturday. 7. On the morning of the following day, Wednesday, Erica's rufous paw thrust itself into room April 2, and dropped a long mauve envelope onto the floor. With indifference, Gannon recognized the big, sloping, very regular handwriting. The stamp had been stuck upside down, and in one corner Erica's fat thumb had left a greasy imprint. Perfume permeated the envelope, and it occurred to Gannon in passing that scenting a letter was like spraying perfume on one's boots to cross the street. He filled his cheeks, blew out the air, and pushed the unopened letter into his pocket. A few minutes later he took it out again, turned it around in his hands, and threw it onto the table. Then he walked across the room a couple of times. All the doors in the pension were open. The sounds of the morning housework mingled with the noise of the trains which took advantage of the drafts to rush through all the rooms. Gannon stayed at home in the mornings, generally swept up in his own rubbish and made his bed. Now he suddenly realized that this was the second day that he had not cleaned up his room. He went out into the passage to look for a broom and a duster. Carrying a bucket, Lydia Nikolaevna scuttled past him like a mouse, and as she went by she asked, "Did Erica give you a letter?" Gannon nodded in silence and picked up a long-handled brush that was lying on the oak chest. In the hall mirror he saw the reflection of the inside of Alfirov's room, the door of which was wide open. Inside that sunny room the weather was heavenly. A slanting cone of radiant dust passed across the corner of the desk, and with agonizing clarity he imagined the photographs which had first been shown to him by Alfirov, and which later he had been examining alone with such excitement when Clara disturbed him. In those photos Mary had been exactly as he remembered her, and now it was terrible to think that his past was lying in someone else's desk. The reflection of the mirror vanished with a slam as Lydia Nikolaevna, pattering down the corridor with her diminutive steps, pushed the door shut. Floor brush in hand, Gannon returned to his own room. On the table lay a mauve rectangle. By a rapid association of thought evoked by that envelope and the reflection of the desk in the mirror, he remembered those very old letters which he kept in a black wallet in the bottom of his suitcase, alongside the automatic pistol that he had brought with him from the Crimea. He scooped up the long envelope from the table, pushed the window open wider with his elbow, and with his strong fingers tore the letter crosswise, then tore up each portion and threw the scraps to the wind. Gleaming, the paper snowflakes flew into the sunlit abyss. One fragment fluttered onto the windowsill, and on it Gannon read a few mangled lines. "Ors, I can forg of. I only prat you be hap." He flicked it off the windowsill into the yard, smelling of coal and spring and wide open spaces. Shrugging with relief, he started to tidy his room. Then one after another he heard his fellow lodgers returning for lunch, heard Alfierov laugh aloud, and Potyagin softly mutter something. And a little while later Erica appeared in the passage and gave the gong despondent bang. On his way to lunch he overtook Clara, who gave him a frightened look, and Gannon smiled such a beautiful, kind smile that Clara thought, so what if he is a thief? There's no one like him. Gannon opened the door. She lowered her head and walked past him into the dining room. The others were already sitting at their places, and Lydia Nikolaevna, holding an enormous ladle in her tiny withered hand, was sadly pouring out soup. Potyagin had been unsuccessful again today. The old man really had no luck. The French had allowed him in, but the Germans for some reason would not let him out. Meanwhile, he had only just enough money left to make the journey, and that foul-up lasted for another week. He would have to spend his money on subsistence, and then it would not be enough to get him to Paris. As he consumed his soup, he described with a cheerless and ponderous jocularity how he had been chased from one department to another, how he had been unable to explain what he wanted, how finally a tired and exasperated official had bawled him out. Gannon looked him up and said, "Let me come with you tomorrow, Anton Sergeyevich. I have plenty of time to spare. I'll help you talk to them." His German was indeed good. "Why, thank you," Potyagin replied, and he again noticed, as he had the day before, the unusual brightness of Gannon's expression. "It's enough to make one weep, you know. I spent 2 hours standing in a queue again and came back empty-handed." "Thanks, Lyovushka. I expect my wife will be having trouble too," Alfierov began. Something then happened again, and which had never happened to him before. He felt an intolerable blush slowly suffusing his face and tickling his forehead as if he had drunk too much vinegar. Coming to lunch, it had not occurred to him that these people, the ghosts of his dream life in exile, would talk about his real life, about Mary. With horror and shame he recalled that in his ignorance the day before yesterday at lunch he had laughed with the others at Alfierov's wife, and somebody might laugh again today. "She's very efficient, though," Alfierov was saying meanwhile. "She can stand up for herself. She knows how to look after herself, does my little wife." Colin and Gornestefov exchanged looks and giggled, silently, sullenly. Gannon rolled a bread ball. He almost got up and went out, but mastered himself. Raising his head, he made himself look at Alfierov, and having looked, was amazed how Mary could have married that person with the sparse little beard and shiny plump nose. And the thought that he was sitting beside the man who had caressed Mary, who knew the feel of her lips, her jokes, her laugh, her movements, and who was now waiting for her, the thought was terrible, but with it he also felt a certain thrilling pride as he recalled that it had been him and not her for husband that Mary had first surrendered her profound, unique fragrance. After lunch he went for a walk, then climbed up onto the top deck of a bus. Down below, the streets poured by, little black figures dashed around on the shiny sunlit asphalt. The bus swayed and thundered, and Gannon felt that this alien city passing before him was nothing but a moving picture. As he returned home, he saw Potyagin knocking on Clara's door, and Potyagin too seemed to him a ghost, something extraneous and irrelevant. "Our friend is in love with someone again," Anton Sergeyevich nodded toward the door as he drank tea with Clara. "It's not you, is it?" Clara turned away. Her ample bust rose and fell. She could not believe it to be true. It frightened her. She was frightened by the Gannon who rifled other people's desks, but she was nevertheless pleased by Potyagin's question. "He's not in love with you, is he, Klarochka?" he repeated, blowing on his tea and giving her a sidelong glance over his pince-nez. "He broke it off with Ludmilla yesterday," Clara said suddenly, feeling that she could reveal the secret to Potyagin. "I thought so," the old man nodded, sipping with relish. "He wouldn't be looking so radiant for nothing. Anyway, with the old, on with the new. Did you hear what he suggested to me today? He's coming with me to the police tomorrow." "I shall be seeing her this evening," said Clara reflectively. "Poor girl, she sounded deathly on the telephone." Potyagin sighed. "Ah, youth, that girl will get over it. No harm done. It's all for the best. As for me, Klarochka, I shall die soon." "Good heavens, Anton Sergeyevich, what nonsense!" "No, it's not nonsense. I had another attack last night. At one moment my heart was in my mouth, and at the next moment it was under the bed." "You poor man," said Clara anxiously. "You should see a doctor." Potyagin smiled. "I was joking. On the contrary, I've felt far better lately, and there was no attack. I invented on the spur of the moment, just to see your great eyes open still wider. If we were in Russia, Klarochka, some country doctor or a well-to-do architect would be courting you. Tell me, do you love Russia?" "Very much. Quite so. We should love Russia. Without the love us immigrants, Russia is finished. None of the people there love her." "I'm already 26, said Clara. "I type all morning, and 5 times a week I wrote until 6. I get very tired. I'm quite alone in Berlin. What do you think, Anton Sergeyevich? Will it go on like this for long?" "I don't know, my dear," sighed Potyagin. "I'd tell you if I knew, but I don't. I worked too, started up a magazine here, and now I've got nothing to show for it. I only hope to God that I can get to Paris. Life's more free and easy there. What do you think? Will I get there? Why, of course you will, Anton Sergeyevich. Everything will be arranged tomorrow. Life's freer and cheaper, apparently, said Potugin, spooning up an unmelted scrap of sugar and thinking that there was something Russian about that little porous lump, something rather like the melting snow in springtime. 8. In the sense of routine, Ganin's day became emptier after his break with Ludmilla, but on the other hand he did not feel bored for having nothing to do. He was so absorbed with his memories that he was unaware of time. His shadow lodged in Frau Dorn's pension, while he himself was in Russia, reliving his memories as though they were a reality. Time for him had become a progress of recollection which unfolded gradually, and although his affair with Mary in those far-off days had lasted not just for 3 days, not just for a week, but for much longer, he did not feel any discrepancy between actual time and that other time in which he relived the past, since his memory did not take account of every moment and skipped over the blank, unmemorable stretches, only eliminating those connected with Mary. Thus no discrepancy existed between the course of life past and life present. It seemed as though his past, in that perfect form it had reached, ran now like a regular pattern through his everyday life in Berlin. Whatever Ganin did at present, the other life comforted him unceasingly. It was not simply reminiscence, but a life that was much more real, much more intense than the life lived by his shadow in Berlin. It was a marvelous romance that developed with genuine tender care. By the second week of August in northern Russia, there was already a touch of autumn in the air. Every now and again, a small yellow leaf falls from a birch tree. The broad fields, already harvested, have a bright autumnal emptiness. Along the forest edge, where an expanse of tall grass spared by the haymaker shows its sheen to the wind, torpid bumblebees sleep on the mauve cushions of scabious flowers, and one afternoon in a pavilion of the park, yes, the pavilion, it stood on rotting piles above a ravine, reached from either side by 2 sloping footbridges, slippery with alder almonds and fir needles. In its small diamond-shaped window frames were the panes of different colored glass. If, say, you looked through a blue one, the world seemed frozen in a lunar trance. Through a yellow one, everything appeared extraordinarily gay. Through a red one, the sky looked pink and the foliage as dark as burgundy. Some of the panes were broken, their jagged edges joined up by a spider's web. Inside the pavilion was whitewashed. Vacationists who illegally wandered into the estate's park from their dachas had scribbled in pencil on the walls and on the folding table. One day, Mary and 2 of her rather plain girlfriends wandered there too. He first overtook them on a path which ran alongside the river and drove so close to her that the girlfriends leaped aside with a shriek. He drove on round the park, cut through the middle, and then from a distance, through the leaves, watched them go into the pavilion. He leaned his bicycle up against a tree and went in after them. "This is private property," he said in a low, hoarse voice. "There's even a notice on the gate saying so." She said nothing in reply, looking at him with her mischievous, slanting eyes. Pointing to one of the faint graffiti, he inquired, "Did you do that?" It said, "On the 3rd of July, Mary, Lida, and Nina sat out a thunderstorm in this pavilion." All 3 of them burst out laughing, and then he laughed too. He sat on the window table, swinging his legs, and noticed with annoyance that he had torn one of the black socks at the ankle. Suddenly, pointing at a pink hole in the silk, Mary said, "Look, the sun has come out." They talked about thunderstorms, about people living in the dachas, about his having had typhus, about the funny student in the military hospital, and about the concert. She had adorable, mobile eyebrows, a dark complexion with a covering of very fine lustrous down, which gave a specially warm tinge to her cheeks. Her nostrils flared as she talked, emitting short laughs and sucking the sweetness from a grass stalk. Her voice was rapid and burry, with sudden chest tones, and a dimple quivered at her open neck. Then, toward evening, he escorted her and her friends to the village, and as they walked down a green weed-grown forest path, at the spot where stood a lame bench, he told them, with a very straight voice, "Macaroni grows in Italy. When still small, it's called vermicelli. That means Mike's worms in Italian." He arranged to take them all boating next day, but she appeared without her companions. At the rickety jetty, he unwound the clanking chain of the rowboat, a big heavy affair of mahogany, removed the tarpaulin, screwed in the rowlocks, pulled the oars out of a long box, inserted the rudder pintle into its steel socket, From some distance came the steady roar of the sluice gates at the watermill. One could distinguish the foamy folds of the falling water and the russet gold sheen of the pine logs that floated near. Mary sat at the rudder. He pushed off with a boat hook, and slowly started to row along the park shore where dense alder shrubs cast reflections like black ice spots upon the water, and many dark blue demoiselle dragonflies flittered about. Then he turned into the middle of the river, weaving between the islets of algal brocade, while Mary, holding both ends of the tiller rope in her hand, dangled the other in the water, trying to pull off the shiny yellow heads of water lilies. The rowlocks creaked at every stroke of the oars, and as he leaned back, then stretched forward, Mary, facing him in the stern, alternately moved away and drew closer in her navy blue jacket, open over a light blouse that breathed with her. The river now reflected the terracotta of the left-hand bank, overgrown at the top with fir and racemosa. Names and dates had been cut in the red steep, and in one place, 10 years ago, someone had carved a huge face with prominent cheekbones. The right bank sloped gently with the purple patches of heather between dappled birch trees, and then cool darkness enveloped the boat under the bridge. From above came the heavy beat of hoofs and wheels, and as the boat glided out, the dazzling sun flashed on the tips of the oars and displayed the hay cart crossing the low bridge at a green slope crowned by the white pillars of a boarded-up Alexandrine country mansion. Then a dark wood came down to the water's edge. On both banks, with a gentle rustle, and the boat sailed into the reeds. No one at home knew about it, and life went on its dear, familiar summertime way, hardly touched by the distant war, which had now been in progress for a whole year. Linked to a wing by a gallery, the old greenish-gray wooden house, with stained-glass windows and its twin verandas, gazed out toward the fringe of the park and at the orange, pretzel-shaped pattern of the garden paths which framed the black earth luxuriance of the flower-beds. In the drawing-room with its white furniture, the marble tones of old-bound magazines lay on the rose-embroidered tablecloth. The yellow parquet spilled out of a tilted mirror in an oval frame, and the daguerreotypes on the walls seemed to glisten whenever the white upright piano tinkled into life. In the evening, the tall blue-coated butler, in cotton gloves, carried a silk-shaded lamp out onto the veranda, and Gannon would come home to drink tea and gulp cold curds and whey on that lighted veranda, and the rush mat on the floor and the black laurels beside the stone steps leading into the garden. He now saw Mary every day on the far side of the river, where the deserted white mansion stood on a green hill, and where there was another park larger and wilder than the one around the ancestral house. In front of that other mansion, under the lime trees, on a broad terrace above the river, stood some benches and a round iron table, with a hole in its center to drain off the rainwater. From there one could see far below a second bridge crossing a green-scummed bend in the river, and the road leading up to Voskresink. This terrace was their favorite spot. Once, when they had met there on a sunny evening after a rainstorm, they had noticed a Swedish phrase scribbled on that garden table. Some village rowdy had linked their names by a short, crude verb, which, moreover, he had misspelled. The inscription had been done in indelible pencil, and it was slightly blurred by the rain. Twigs, leaves, and the chalky vermicules of bird droppings were also sticking to the tabletop, and since the table belonged to them, since it was sacred, sanctified by their meetings, they began calmly and without a word to rub out the damp scribble of tufts of grass. And when the whole surface had turned a ridiculous lilac color, and Mary's fingers looked as if she had just been picking bilberries, Gannon, turning away and staring hard through narrowed eyes at a yellowy green, warm, flowing something which at normal times was linden foliage, announced to Mary that he had been in love with her for a long time. In those first days of love-making, they kissed so much that Mary's lips grew swollen, and her neck, so warm under her hair bow, bore tender vampire marks. She was an amazingly cheerful girl, who laughed not so much from mockery as from sheer humor. She loved jingles, catchwords, puns, and poems. A song would stick in her head for 2 or 3 days, then it would be forgotten and a new one would take possession. During their first few meetings, for instance, she kept on soulfully repeating in her burry voice, "Vanya's arms and legs they tied, long in jail was he mortified." And then she would say with her husky, crooning laugh, "Lovely song." Around that time, the last wild raspberries, rain-soaked and sweet, were ripening in the ditches. She was unusually fond of them. In fact, she was more or less permanently sucking something, a stalk, a leaf, a fruit drop, She carried Lantern's collar moles loose in her pocket, stuck together in lumps with bits of rubbish and wool sticking to them. She used a cheap, sweet perfume called Tagore. Gannon now tried to recapture that scent again, mixed with the fresh smells of the autumnal park. But as we know, memory can restore to life everything except smells, although nothing revives the past so completely as a smell that was once associated with it. For a moment, Gannon stopped recollecting and wondered how he had been able to live for so many years without thinking about Mary, and then he caught up with her again. She was running along a dark, rustling path, her black bow looking in flight like a huge Camberwell beauty. Suddenly Mary pulled up, gripped him by the shoulder, lifted her foot, and started to rub her sand-dusted shoe against the stocking of her other leg, higher up under the hem of her blue skirt. Gannon fell asleep, lying dressed on top of his bed cover. His reminiscences had blurred and changed into a dream. The dream was odd and most precious, and he would have remembered it only had he not been woken at dawn by a strange noise that sounded like a peal of thunder. He sat up and listened. The thunder turned out to be an incomprehensible groaning and shuffling outside the door. Somebody was scraping at it, gleaming very faintly in the dim, drawn air. The door handle was suddenly pressed down and flicked up again, but although it was unlocked, the door stayed shut. In pleasurable anticipation of adventure, Gannon slipped off his bed, and clenching his left fist in case of need, he flung open the door with his right hand. In a sweeping movement, like a huge soft doll, a man fell prone against his shoulder. This was so unexpected that Gannon almost hit him, but he at once sensed the man had only fallen on him because he was incapable of standing up. He pushed him aside toward the wall and fumbled for the light. In front of him, leaning his head against the wall and gasping for air with his mouth wide open, stood old Potyagan, barefoot, wearing a long nightshirt open at his grizzled chest. His eyes, bare and blind without their pince-nez, were unblinking. His face was the color of dry clay. The large mound of his stomach heaved beneath the taut cotton of his nightshirt. Gannon immediately realized that the old man had been overcome by another heart attack. He supported him, and Potyagan, moving his putty-colored legs with difficulty, tottered to a chair, collapsed into it, and threw back his head. His gray face had now broken out in a sweat. Gannon dipped a towel into his jug and pressed its heavy, wet folds into the old man's bare chest. He had a feeling at any moment all the bones in that big tense body might snap with a sharp crack. Potyagan took a deep breath and expelled the air with a whistle. It was not just a breath, but a tremulous pleasure, which immediately caused his features to revive. With an encouraging smile, Gannon continued to press the wet towel to his body and rub his chest and sides. "But better," the old man breathed. "Relax," said Gannon. "You'll be all right in a moment." Potyagan breathed and groaned, wriggling his large, bare, crooked toes. Gannon put a blanket around him, gave him some water to drink, and opened the window wider. "Couldn't breathe," said Potyagan laboriously. "Couldn't get into your room. Too weak. Didn't want to die alone." "Just relax, Anton Sergeyevich. It will be daylight soon. We'll call a doctor." Potyagan slowly wiped his brow with his hand and began to breathe more evenly. "It's gone," he said. "Gone for a while. I had no more of my drops left. That's why it was so bad. And we'll buy you some more drops. Would you like to move over into my bed?" "No, I'll sit here a while and then go back to my room. It's gone now, and tomorrow morning let's put it off until Friday," said Gannon. "The visa won't run away." Potyagan licked his dried lips with his thick, rough tongue. "They've been waiting for me in Paris for a long time, Leofoshka, and my niece hasn't got the money to send me for the journey. Oh dear!" Gannon sat on the window ledge. In a flash he wondered where it was that he had sat like this not long ago, and in a flash he remembered the stained glass interior of the pavilion, the white folding table, the hole in his sock. "Please put the light out, my dear fellow," Potyagan asked him. "It hurts my eyes." Everything seemed strange in the semi-darkness. The noise of the first trains, the large gray ghost in the armchair, the gleam of water spilled on the floor. And it was all much more mysterious and vague than the deathless reality in which Gannon was living. It was morning, and Colin was making tea for Gornistovov. On that day, Thursday, Gornistovov had to leave town early in order to see a ballerina who was engaging a troupe. Everyone in the house, therefore, was still asleep when Colin shuffled into the kitchen for hot water, wearing a remarkably dirty little kimono and battered boots on bare feet. His round, unintelligent, very Russian face, with its snub nose and languorous blue eyes, he saw himself as Verlaine's half Pierrot and half Gavroche, was puffy and shiny. His uncombed blonde hair fell across his forehead. The untied laces of his boots pattered against the floor with a noise like a fine rain. Pouting like a woman, he fiddled with the teapot and then began to hum quietly and intensely. Gordestov was finishing dressing. He put on his polka-dotted bow tie, lost his temper over a pimple which he had just nicked while shaving, and which was now oozing pus and blood through a thick layer of powder. His features were dark and very regular, and long curled eyelashes gave his brown eyes a clear, innocent expression. He had short, black, slightly frizzled hair. He shaved the back of his neck like a Russian coachman, and had grown sideburns which curved past his ears in 2 dark strips. Like his companion, he was short, very thin, with highly developed leg muscles but narrow in the chest and shoulders. They had made friends comparatively recently, had danced in a Russian cabaret somewhere in the Balkans, and had arrived at Berlin 2 months ago in search of their theatrical fortune. A particular nuance, an odd affected manner, set them somewhat apart from the other lodges, but in all honesty no one could blame this harmless couple for being as happy as a pair of ring-doves. Colin, left alone in the untidy room after his friend had gone, opened a manicure case and, crooning softly, began to pare his fingernails. Although not remarkable for his cleanliness, he kept his nails in excellent condition. The room reeked of Oregon perfume and sweat. A ball of hair combings floated in the washbin water. Ballet dancers pranced in photographs on the walls. On the table lay a large open fan and a dirty starched color. Having admired the coral varnish of his nails, Colin carefully washed his hands, smeared his face and neck with sickly sweet toilet water, and threw off his dressing gown. Naked, he took a few steps on his points, did a little entrechat, quickly dressed, powdered his nose, and made up his eyes. Then, having fastened all the buttons of his gray, close-fitting top coat, he went out for a walk, flicking the tip of his fancy cane regularly up and down. At the front door he returned home for lunch. He overtook Gannon, who had just brought some medicine for Potugin. The old man was feeling better. He was doing a little riding and walking about his room, but Clara, by agreement with Gannon, had decided not to let him out of the house that day. Sneaking up behind him, Colin gripped Gannon's arm above the elbow. Gannon turned around. "Oh, Colin, had a good stroll?" "Alec's away," said Colin, as he climbed up the stairs beside Gannon. "I'm terribly worried. I hope he's going to get that engagement." "Yes, of course," said Gannon, who was always at a complete loss of conversation with him. Colin laughed. "Alfierov got stuck in the lift again. Now it's not working." He ran the knob of his cane along the banisters and looked at Gannon with a shy smile. "May I sit in your room for a bit? I'm so bored today." "Don't imagine you can make eyes at me just because you're bored," Gannon mentally snapped at him as he opened the door with a pinch on, but aloud he said, "Unfortunately, I'm busy at the moment. Some other time." "What a pity," drawled Colin, following Gannon inside and pulling the door after him. The door did not shut, as someone had thrust a large brown hand from behind, and a deep bass Berlin voice boomed, "One moment, gentlemen." Gannon and Colin looked around. A stout, mustachioed postman crossed the threshold. "Does Herr Alfierov live here?" "First door on the left," said Gannon. "Thank you," sang out the postman, and knocked on the door he had been shown. It was a telegram. "What is it? What is it? What is it?" Alfierov babbled feverishly, twisting it in his clumsy fingers. He was so excited that at first he was unable to read the glued-on strip of faint, uneven letters. "Arriving Saturday at 8 a.m. Suddenly Alfierov understood, sighed, and crossed himself. "Thank the Lord she's coming." Smiling broadly and stroking his bony thighs, he sat down on the bed and started to rock backward and forward. His watery eyes were blinking rapidly. A slanting shaft of sun gilded his little dung-colored beard. "Sehr gut," he muttered to himself. "The day after tomorrow. Sehr gut. What a state my shoes are in. Mary will be amazed. Still, we'll survive somehow. We'll rent a nice, cheap little flat. She'll decide. Meanwhile, we'll live here for a bit. Thank goodness there's a door between the 2 rooms." A short while later he went out into the passage and knocked on his neighbors. Gannon thought, "Why can't they leave me alone today?" Coming straight to the point, Alfierov began, and he surveyed the room all around. "I say, Gleb Lvovich, when are you thinking of leaving?" Gannon looked at him with irritation. "My first name is Lev. Try and remember." "But you are leaving on Saturday, aren't you?" Alfierov asked, thinking to himself, "We'll have to place the bed differently, and the wardrobe must be moved away from the communicating door." "Yes, I'm leaving," Gannon replied, and again, as at lunch the day before, he felt acutely embarrassed. "Well, that's splendid," Alfierov put in excitedly. "Sorry to disturb you, Gleb Lvovich." And with a final glance around the room, he went noisily out. "Idiot," muttered Gannon. "To hell with him. What was I thinking about so delightfully just now? Ah, yes, the night, the rain, the white pillars. Lydia Nikolaevna! Lydia Nikolaevna!" Alfierov's oily voice called loudly for the corridor. "There's no getting away from him," thought Gannon angrily. "I won't lunch here today. Enough. The street asphalt gave off a violet gloss, the sun tangled with the wheels of motor cars. Near the beer hall there was a garage, and from the gaping gloom of its entrance came a tender whiff of carbide, and that chance exhalation helped Gannon to remember more vividly yet the rainy rush in late August and early September, the torrent of happiness which the specters of his Berlin life kept interrupting. Straight out of the bright country house he would plunge into the black, bubbling darkness and ignite the soft flame of his bicycle lamp, and now when he inhaled that smell of carbide, it brought back everything at once, the wet grasses whipping against his moving leg and wheel spokes, the disk of milky light that imbibed and dissolved the obscurity, the different objects that emerged from it, now a wrinkled puddle, or a gristling pebble, then the bridge planks carpeted with horse dung, and then finally the turnstile of the wicket, through which he pushed, with the rain-drenched pea-tree hedge, yielding to the sweep of his shoulder. Presently, through streams of the night, there became visible the slow rotation of columns, washed by the same gentle whitish beam of his bicycle lamp, and there on the six-columned porch of a stranger's closed mansion, Gannon was welcomed by a blur of cool fragrance, a blitted perfume of damp surge, and that autumnal rain kiss was so long and so deep that afterward great luminous spots swam before one's eyes, and the broad-branching, many-leaved rustling sound of the rain seemed to acquire new force. With rain-wet fingers he opened the little lantern's glass door and blew out the light. Out of the darkness a humid and heavy pressure of gusty air reached the levers. Mary, now perched on the peeling balustrade, caressed his temples with the cold palm of her little hand, and he could make out in the dark the vague outline of her soggy hair bow and the smiling brilliance of her eyes. In the whirling blackness of the strong, ample downpour surged through the limes facing the porch and drew creaks from their trunks, which were banded with iron clasps to support their decaying might. And amid the hubbub of the autumn night he unbuttoned her blouse, kissed her hot clavicle. She remained silent. Only her eyes glistened faintly, and the skin of her bared breast slowly turned cold from the touch of his lips in the humid night wind. They spoke little. It was too dark to speak. When at last he struck a match to consult his watch, Mary blinked and brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek. He flung his arm around her, while impelling his bicycle with one hand placed on its saddle, and thus they slowly walked away, the night now reduced to a drizzle. First there was the descent along the path to the bridge, and then the farewell there, protracted and sorrowful, as though before a long separation. And on the black stormy night, when on the eve of his return to St. Petersburg for the beginning of the school year they met for the last time on their pillared porch, something dreadful and unexpected occurred, a portent perhaps of all the desecrations to come. The rain that night was particularly noisy, and their meeting especially tender. Suddenly Mary cried out and jumped down from the balustrade. By the light of a match Gannon saw that the shutter of one of the windows giving onto the porch was open, and that a human face, its white nose flattened, was pressed against the inside of the black window pane. It moved and slithered away, but both of them had time to recognize the carroty hair and gaping mouth of a watchman's son, a foul-mouthed lecher of about 20 who was always crossing their path in the avenues of the park. In one furious leap Gannon hurled himself at the window, shattered the glass with his black, and crashed into the icy dark. With this momentum his head butted a powerful chest, which gasped at the blow. Next moment they were grappling and rolling across the echoing parquet, bumping into dead pieces of furniture draped in dust covers. Freeing his right hand, Gannon began to slam his rock-like fist into the wet face, which he suddenly found underneath him. He did not get up until the powerful body, which had pinned to the floor, suddenly went slack and began to groan. Breathing hard, bumping against soft corners in the dark, he reached the window and climbed back onto the porch to find the sobbing, terrified Mary. He noticed then that something warm and tasting of iron was trickling out of his mouth, and that his hands were caught by glass splinters. The next morning he left for St. Petersburg, and on the way to the station in the close carriage rolling along with a soft, muffled rumble, through the window he saw Mary walking on the edge of the road with her girlfriends. The coachwork, lined with black leather, hid her immediately, and since he was not alone in the coupe, he did not dare glance back through the oval rear peeper. On that September day, fate gave him an advanced taste of his future parting from Mary, his parting from Russia. It was a testing ordeal, a mysterious prevision. There was a peculiar sadness about the rowan trees, flame red with fruit, receding one after another into the gray overcast, and it seemed incredible that next spring he would see those fields again, the lone boulder, those meditative telegraph poles. At home in St. Petersburg everything seemed newly clean, bright, and positive, as it always does when one returns from the country. School began again. He was in the penultimate form. He neglected his studies. The first snow fell, and the cast-iron railings, the backs of the listless horses, and the barge-loads of firewood were covered with a thin layer of downy white. Mary did not move to St. Petersburg until November. They met under the same arch where Liza dies in Tchaikovsky's The Queen of Spades. Soft, oversized snowflakes came down vertically in the gray matte glass air. At this, their first meeting in St. Petersburg, Mary seemed subtly different, perhaps because she was wearing a hat and a fur coat. From that day began the new snowbound era of their love. It was difficult to meet. Long walks in the frost were agonizing, and finding a warm place to be alone in museums and cinemas was most agonizing of all. No wonder that in the frequent, piercingly tender letters which they wrote to each other on blank days he lived in the English Quay, she on Caravan Street, they both recalled the pass through the park, the smell of fallen leaves, as being something unimaginably dear and gone forever. Perhaps only they did it to enliven their love with bittersweet memories, but perhaps they truly realized that their real happiness was over. In the evenings they rang each other up to find out if a letter had been received, or where and how to meet. Her amusing grassement was even more attractive on the telephone. She would say truncated little poems, laugh warmly, press the mouthpiece to her breast, and he imagined he could hear her heart beating. They talked like this for hours. That winter she wore a gray fur coat which made her look slightly plumper, and suede spats put on over her thin outdoor shoes. He never saw her suffering from a cold or even looking chilly. Frost or driving snow only vivified her, and on an icy snowstorm in some dark alleyway, he would bare her shoulders and the snowflakes tickled her, and she would smile through wet eyelashes, press his head to her, and a miniature snowfall would drop from his astrakhan cap onto her naked breast. These meetings in the wind and frost tortured him more than her. He felt that their love was flaring and wearing thin as a result of these incomplete trysts. Every love demands privacy, shelter, refuge, and they had no such refuge. Their families did not know each other. Their secret, which at first had been so wonderful, now hindered them. He began to feel that all would be well if she became his mistress, even if only in furnished rooms, and the thought somehow persisted his mind apart from his feelings of desire which were already weakening under the torment of their meager contacts. So they roamed all winter, reminiscing about the countryside, dreaming of the next summer, occasionally quarreling in fits of jealousy, squeezing each other's hands under the shaggy but scrimped rugs of cab drivers' sleighs. Then early in the new year Mary was taken away to Moscow. Strangely enough, this parting was a relief for Ganin. He knew that in the summer she was planning to return to a cottage on his parents' land in the province of St. Petersburg. At first he thought about it a lot, imagined a new summer, new meetings, wrote her name in piercing letters, and then began to write less often. And when his family moved to the country estate in mid-May, he stopped writing altogether. Simultaneously, he found time to make and break a liaison with an elegant and enchanting blonde lady, whose husband was fighting in Galicia. Then Mary returned. Her voice crackled weakly from a great distance. A noise hummed in the telephone as in a seashell. At times, even more distant voice on a cross line kept interrupting, carrying on conversations with someone else in the fourth dimension. The telephone in their country house was an old one with a hand crank, and between Mary and him lay 30 miles of roaring darkness. "I'll come to see you," Gannon shouted into the receiver. "I'm saying I'll come. On my bicycle. It'll take a couple of hours. Didn't want to stay at Voskresink again. Do you hear? Papa refused to rent a dacha at Voskresink again. From your place to this town it's 30... Don't forget to bring those boots," interrupted a low, unconcerned voice. Then Mary was heard again through the buzzing in miniature, as if she were speaking from the wrong end of a telescope. And when she had vanished altogether, Gannon leaned against the wall and felt that his ears were burning. He set off at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, in an open-necked shirt and football shorts, rubber-soled shoes on his sockless feet. With the wind behind him, he rode fast, picking out smooth patches between sharp flints on the highway, that he remembered how he used to ride past Mary last July before he even knew her. After 10 miles or so, his back tire burst, and he spent a long time repairing it, seated on the edge of a ditch. Larks sang above the fields on both sides of the road. Gray convertibles sped by in a cloud of gray dust, carrying 2 military men with owlish goggles. The tire mended, he pumped it up hard and rode on, aware that he had not allowed for this, and was already an hour behind time. Turning off the highway, he rode through a wood along a path shown to him by a passing muzhik, then took another turning, but a wrong one this time, and continued for a long while before getting back onto the right road again. He rested and had to eat at a little village, and then when he only had 8 miles to go, he ran over a sharp stone, and once more the same tire expired with a whistle. It was already getting dark when he reached the small town where Mary was spending the summer. She was waiting for him at the gates of the public park, as they had agreed, but she had already given up hope of his coming, and she had been waiting since 6 o'clock. When she saw him, she stumbled with excitement and almost fell. She was wearing a diaphanous white dress, which Gannon did not know. Her black bow had gone, and as a result, Her adorable head seemed smaller. There were blue cornflowers in her piled-up hair. That night, in the strange, stealthily deepening darkness, under the lindens of that spacious public park, on a stone slab sunk deep in moss, Gannon, in the course of one brief tryst, grew to love her more poignantly than before, and fell out of love with her, as it seemed then, forever. At first they conversed in a rapturous murmur about the long time they had not seen each other, about the resemblance of a glowworm that shone in the moss to a tiny semaphore. Her dear, dear Tartar eyes glided near his face. Her white dress seemed to shimmer in the dark, and oh God, that fragrance of hers, incomprehensible, unique in the world. I am yours, she said. Do what you like with me. In silence, his heart thumping, he leaned over, running his hands along her soft, cool legs, but the public park was alive with odd rustling sounds. Somebody seemed to be continuously approaching from behind the bushes. The chill and the hardness of the stone slab hurt his bare knees, and Mary lay there, too submissive, too still. He stopped, then emitted an awkward short laugh. I keep feeling that someone's around, said Gannon, and got up. Mary sighed, rearranged her dress, a whitish blur, and stood out too. As they walked back to the park gate along a moon-flecked path, she stooped over the grass and picked up one of the pale green lamprids they had noticed. She held it upon the flat of her hand, bending over it, examining it closely, then burst out laughing and said in a quaint parody of a village lass, "Bless me if it isn't simply a cold little worm." It was then that Gannon, tired, cross at himself, freezing in a thin shirt, decided that it was all over, that he was no longer enamored of Mary. And a few minutes later, when he was cycling in the moonlight haze homeward along the pale surface of the road, he knew that he would never visit her again. The summer passed. Mary did not write or telephone. While he was busy with other things, other emotions, once again he returned to St. Petersburg for the winter, took his final exams earlier than was normal, in December, and entered the Mikhailov officer cadet school. Next summer, in the year of the Revolution, he met Mary again. It was toward evening, and he was standing on the platform at Warsaw Station. The train was taking holiday makers out of their dachas and had just pulled in. While waiting for the bell to ring, he started to walk up and down the dirty platform. As he gazed at a broken luggage trolley, he was thinking of something different about the shooting that had taken place the day before on Nevsky Avenue. At the same time, he was annoyed that he had failed to get through the family estate by telephone, that he would have to crawl all the way there from the station by Dronsky. When the third bell clanged, he walked over to the only blue coach in the train, started to climb up its vestibule, and there, looking down on him from above, stood Mary. She had changed in the past year, had grown perhaps slightly thinner, and was wearing an unfamiliar blue coat with a belt. Gannon greeted her awkwardly. There was a clanking of buffers, and the railway car moved. They remained standing in the vestibule. Mary must have seen him earlier and boarded a blue carriage on purpose, although she always traveled in a yellow one, and now with a second-class ticket she did not want to go inside into a compartment. She was holding a bar of Blyton and Robinson's chocolate, and at once broke off a piece and offered it to him. It made Gannon terribly sad to look at her. There was something odd and timid about her whole appearance. She smiled less and kept turning her head away. On her tender neck there were livid marks, like a shadowy necklace, which greatly suited her. He spouted nonsense, showed her the scratch on his jackboot made by a bullet, talked about politics, while the train clattered on between peat bogs, burning in the tawny torrent of the sunset. The grayish peat smoke drifted gently over the ground, forming what seemed like two waves of mist between which the train clove its way. She got off at the first station, and for a long time he stared from the carriage platform after her departing blue figure, and the further away she went, the clearer it became to him that he would never forget her. She did not look round. Out of the dusk came the heavy and fluffy scent of racemosa and bloom. As the train moved off, he went inside. There it was dark, and the conductor, having thought it unnecessary to light the lamp wicks in empty compartments, he lay down on his back on the striped cover of couch-like seat, and through the open door of the corridor window he watched thin wires rising through the smoke of burning peat and the dark gold of the sunset. There was something strange and spooky about traveling in this empty, rattling coach between screams of gray smoke, and curious thoughts passed through his head, as though this had all happened at some time before, as though he had lain there, as now, his hands pillowing the back of his neck, in the draughty, clattering darkness, and the same smoky sunset had amply and sonorously swept past the windows. He never saw Mary again.